You know, we see trade disputes in the news all the time, but this is not your typical story about tariffs on steel or cars. This is a story that is so strange, so incredibly specific, that it involves penguins, bureaucracy, and a completely remote Antarctic island. And honestly, it might just change how you see our entire global system. Let's get into it.
So, when the Prime Minister of Australia described a new trade development as somewhat unexpected and a bit strange, well, he was putting it very, very mildly. As you're about to see, his confusion was absolutely justified. Okay, so the story kicks off in 2025. The US announces this sweeping 10% tariff that's going to hit nations all around the globe. Pretty standard stuff, right? As far as contentious geopolitics go anyway. But then you look at the list of targets, and you find one very, very unusual entry. Yup, you heard that right. A tariff was slapped on Heard Island, a remote sub-Antarctic island whose only permanent residents are penguins, seals, and a whole bunch of seabirds. No people, no industry, no exports to speak of. Nothing. This completely random act of human bureaucracy was what some analysts called a necessary external shock. It basically forced the island's only inhabitants into a position nobody could have ever predicted. I mean, to even begin to fight a tariff, you need a government. So how did the animal kingdom respond to this? Well, they built one. To manage and eventually fight back against this tariff, the native fauna had to create a formal government from scratch. Their very sovereignty was now totally dependent on the art of complex paperwork. And this is the story of the Herdian state.
All right, let's start with the administrative branch, the penguin polity. This is really the strategic core of the new government, where the natural social dynamics of the king penguin colonies got formalized into the rigid and frankly absurd language of law and policy.
Their whole political philosophy was built on this concept called quenched disorder. Now, the idea here is that a stable society isn't a peaceful one. Not at all. Instead, real stability comes from constant, low-level, institutionalized conflict. Think of it like this. Every single penguin has to constantly defend its personal space, its little pecking radius. All this controlled chaos actually prevents the whole system from collapsing into a real war. It's stability through bickering.
And this philosophy, it extends right into their judicial system. The High Court of Colony Center doesn't rely on boring old evidence. Nope. Instead, legal standing is determined by what they call official credentials of legitimacy, or OCL. And this is where the satire just sings. Because the OCL isn't a law degree or a fancy title. It's the biological quality of a penguin's ultraviolet beak spots. So the crucial point is this. Their legal system doesn't really dispense justice. It just ratifies biological dominance. The law exists only to formally legitimize the existing power structure, making sure that the strongest, most aggressive, and best-looking penguins always win. And believe it or not, it gets even darker. Social policy is run by the Department of Juvenile Protective Services, which, and I'm not kidding, operates as a form of codified social Darwinism. Chicks that are in poor condition are literally found guilty of biological failure, and their punishment is something called exile by consensus, where they are systematically pushed to the edge of the colony, exposed to predators as a formal administrative sentence.
Okay, so that's the penguins. Now for the second pillar of the Herdian state, the Antarctic fur seals. They took charge of the courts and, most critically, national defense.
To even gain governing authority, a male seal has to physically establish and defend a territory. The cost of this political service is formalized as the sovereign service tax. And that tax? It's paid in flesh. A governing male loses, on average, 1.5 kilograms of body weight every single day from the constant, exhausting conflict it takes to hold on to power. But here's the catastrophic result of that system. While the entire political class is completely consumed with these exhausting internal power struggles, the state's main defense mandate is a total failure. A staggering 69.3%, nearly 70% of all fur seal pups are lost to leopard seal predation. It's an existential threat that goes completely unaddressed because they're all too busy fighting each other. Now, to manage their own internal fights without, tearing themselves apart, the seals developed this rigid code of conduct. A simple hiss or a growl, that's an initial vocal citation.
a more serious bark, that's a non-negotiable cease and desist order. They even have a delay tactic called the thermoregulatory filibuster, where lifting their flippers to absorb sun is a recognized political maneuver to stall for time.
So with this elaborate, exhausting, and deeply flawed government finally in place, the Herdian state was ready to address the original problem, the human tariff. They decided to fight bureaucracy with more bureaucracy, designing a response aimed not at economic impact, but at maximum administrative irritation. Their strategy was just a masterclass in bureaucratic warfare. First, they had to comply with human rules just to be recognized, so they adopted all the international trade codes. Then, they designed their own retaliatory tariff, carefully calibrated for maximum absurdity and annoyance. And this just perfectly illustrates the absurdity of it all. To be recognized as a taxable entity, they had to translate their entire reality into the sterile language of global trade. So yeah, guano gets a code, but so do their legal rulings. A flipper-slapped arbitration decision is literally classified under the same international trade code as human banknotes and stock certificates. And here it is, their big retaliation. The Herdian state's grand countermeasure was a 100% duty on all imports of, get this, used, non-sanitized date palm fronds. It's a policy so specific, so niche, its only purpose was to mirror the absurdity of the original tariff and create a massive headache for any poor customs agent who had to deal with it. So, by now, the picture is pretty clear, right? In their completely rational attempt to respond to an irrational human policy, the animals of Herd Island accidentally replicated the most inefficient, arbitrary, and maddening aspects of human governance. The core failures of their state are, well, they're a powerful critique. Political stability is defined by constant conflict. All the state's energy is wasted on internal status disputes, while existential threats are just looming. And the law itself is used to formally criminalize weakness. Sound familiar? The analysis of this whole framework draws a direct line to George Orwell's Animal Farm, concluding that the animals, in their quest to manage human interference, ultimately built a society that was, quote, far worse than it was before. And that's the ultimate irony, isn't it? In creating a government to shield themselves from human folly, the animals of Herd Island simply built a flawless mirror, reflecting the ritualized conflict and strategic inertia inherent in so many of our own systems right back at us. Which leaves us with a final and pretty unsettling question. The seals focused on their internal disputes while predators decimated their young. It really makes you wonder, when our own systems reward conflict over progress, what are the existential threats that we are choosing to ignore?